Once again, good morning, everyone. Greetings and welcome in the Grand Salon. Last night I made a joke and said for those of you that wish to listen to Richard's talk and stay here until the morning one, 9:45, 12 hours later, and here we are doing another lecture. So, ladies and gentlemen, today, of course, we have a busy day. There's an 11 o'clock lecture with the wine guys. Then this afternoon, we have Philip Hurst as well as David Smith. So there's a 2:30 and a 3:45 lecture as well. So a busy day here in the Grand Salon. And somewhere nestled between all the enrichment conversational things, we also have trivia in the club taking place, of course, at 12 noon. Ladies and gentlemen, you met this gentleman last night. Would you please welcome back on stage Captain Richard Heyman. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Thank you. Good morning, all. Good to see so many of you up so early and for a busy time at sea. Of course, I'm speaking ahead of where we're going, so I spoke about the Spanish ports yesterday, and today will be about the country of Morocco, which is visible on our port side pretty soon. And this is a land I imagine many of you have been to before, because it's a very interesting nation and has like this whole region, a very long and complicated history of being contested by many people from afar. And Morocco, because of its geographic position on the Atlantic coast of the Maghreb, the North African, let's say, community, it has been the subject of many invasion and a contest within the different parts of Morocco. And now it is an independent nation once again. But it is famous for its variety of people and also its tolerance of others in its midst, and particularly in our contemporary situation where we have a more radicalized Islamist movements to the Middle East and across North Africa. Morocco has maintained a sort of a balance in the midst of all of this, and it has still synagogues and Catholic churches and the secular life amidst a deeply Islamic country. We are going only to Tangiers and then to Casablanca, but there are excursions off to Marrakesh and to other parts inland and to Rabat. So I'm going to show you just a bit of those places for your interest, and then I do recommend going off and getting as far into Morocco as you can, just because it is quite an intriguing nation. Now, it is, as I said, an independent country now. It stretches all the way down into near Guinea and Senegal. Now, you see this illustration of it. It has that blue line, which is the de facto border. The problem with the whole southern and eastern parts of Morocco is that it's mostly desert, and it's full of nomads and Berber people and other Tuareg and others that come traditionally to the trading centers of northeast, or rather northwest Morocco, which is where all the cities are. So you have the Atlas Mountains running as a spine down towards central Morocco, and then the Spanish Guinea, which was all this region down here, and that's been a point of some warfare and guerrillas down there to try to break away from the Kingdom of Morocco now that the Spanish and the French have left. I'll describe that in a minute, but just for where we are, we're going to go down from Cadiz down to Casablanca and then back up to Tangier, and then off to sea to the Canary Islands. The other major cities that you might have visited are Fez, right in the Central Valley, and then Marrakesh down in the south part of Morocco, though there is much more to the country as you go over the mountains and down into the desert. Now, this is the flag of the country. You'll see it is a recent flag, but it is the kingdom symbolized by the star and on the red, and it has Islamic colors. The former king who passed away a number of years ago, 1998, was King Hassan. That's when I first came to Morocco back in the 90s, and now his son is Mohammed VI, is the current king. And they have their political capital in Rabat, which is just to the north of Casablanca, and there is an excursion to go to see some of the features of that city, a very ancient one with some modern features. Now, when the Kingdom of Morocco is a sort of a federation of various sultans and local chieftains that then had an emperor. And this, for the Americans in the audience, was a letter written by George Washington to, as he calls, the Emperor of Morocco, who had congratulated the establishment of the new country there. And this is a curiosity of history, because it was Morocco that was the first country that recognized the independence of the United States and then created a formal diplomatic relations. And then the United States had its first embassy and also property overseas in Morocco. Actually, in Tangier, there was a legation there that remains as a museum to this day. But the curious about this letter, I don't think you can quite read it, is that Washington apologizes somewhat that the new country is neither wealthy nor does it have silver and gold and a deep culture like Morocco, but it has, as he writes, a industrious people in a bountiful land that will someday prove worth the trouble of independence. And so Morocco has tried to play itself between European powers, Arabs, and others over its long history to try to keep its independence, a theme of Morocco, because it has had all these people come through. First of all, the oldest of the residents are the Berber, which are still about 25% pure Berber in the different parts of Morocco, especially up in the uplands and the mountains and in the nomadic people. But they come from a long line of visitors. Let's say the Phoenicians came, Carthaginians, when Carthage was the capital of the later Phoenician Empire. They had trading posts, and they, again, like in Spain, Cadiz and Malaga, these places were originally trading posts for the Phoenicians, Carthaginians. Then the Romans came. Then the Arabs came in about 600. The horsemen came from the east and subjugated the Berbers, so that in Morocco now, to this day, you have a blend of Arabic and Berber is the national language, along with a lot of words from French and Spanish because of the recent colonial history. The Portuguese came in the 1400s. They had Portuguese armies battled in Morocco to try to establish their rule over this, what was an Islamic people, of course. And so there are Portuguese forts all around the coast of Morocco. And then the Spanish and the French came in at various times, particularly in 1912. The French came and took Tangier and Casablanca, and then began the, let's say, modernization of the country with railroads and a European culture that really continued to influence Morocco, which finally, after World War II, 1956, the protectorate, as it was called, that had been recognized by the League of Nations of Spain and France over Morocco, that was finally ended, and Morocco became an independent nation again. Now, going back a little bit into history, you have the Roman era where the legions came and established different cities, and there are ruins along the north coast, and then the best preserved is Mauritania Tingitana, which is the Latin name for what is now a city called Volubilis. Again, a Latin name, but they found beautiful mosaics amidst the, let's say, the rubble of the Roman era, and this is a site you will not see at any other place in Morocco, because they don't like nude bathing anymore. But the Berber are a very dynamic people. Now they've sort of been hospitable and also in conflict with all the many people that have come to this part of the world. They are great horsemen. They are great artisans, musicians. I was just playing some Moroccan music, which is a real characteristic of Morocco. They're very animated people, and they don't have the kind of restraint that you feel in the rest of much of the Arab world, though they put on great festivals and parades. And if you have a chance in the uplands of Morocco, they have these great horse charges, cavalry. They fire off the old muskets, and then they all sit down and have a great feast, usually a whole lamb that you under a tent, then you dine with your fingers off the couscous and the lamb and such, and are entertained by the dancing and sort of almost like a trance-like music that the Berber have, which is part of the Moroccan tradition that you don't find in other parts of the Islamic world. And you might see women who have the henna tattoo, and this is a wedding decoration. Of course, it doesn't stay; it washes off, which is, I think, a good idea for tattoos. But then again, it's a funny world that way. And then the national dish, if you've ever had this, is a tagine, which is a great steaming platters with these characteristic covers. Now these are coming to a great royal feast with a great bronze tagine to give out to the guests. Don't think they serve that on the fine dining aboard here because it's meant to be eaten with your fingers. You take it right by your hand. I think utensils sort of get in the way of the enjoyment of food. That's a choice of cuisine. But here's one of them. This has chicken and dates and olives, so it's often kind of sweet and then pungent, sometimes quite spicy. But it's a great feast that they put on in Morocco. Now we're going to be going to Tangier, as I said, after Casablanca, but this is the north point across from Gibraltar. And so this Cape Spartel in English at least has a traditional lighthouse. So this was the other pillar of Hercules. These high promontories that were the gateway into the Mediterranean world are marked by navigation lights like this one, and then towns right along the shore, Tangier being the primary one for the north coast up there. This is at the very extreme north end of Morocco, so it was the gateway to Europe. And again, this is a town. I don't know if anybody's been there. Someone told me they were there years and years ago. It was too dangerous to go out into the town at night because it's sort of a famous town for, smuggling, spies. It doesn't have really that much, as much scenic interest as some other of the interior cities of Morocco, but it has the old Medina, the old town, the port area. And so it's a place famous for swarthy sailors and pickpockets and things like that. Now, it's supposedly a lot safer than it used to be since the last time they picked me clean there. But also it's a booming city now, and it has a long history again of between all these other people. But curiously, it was an English town back in the early 1600s when the trade between Britain and the Mediterranean was so important that it was given a royal charter as an English town and had English troops and navy there. And then it was attacked by the Dutch, and finally the English left, and then they ended up just across the way in Gibraltar, where they remain. But now this port is the major transit for passengers and also for goods from all of Europe and the Mediterranean to come into Morocco if they don't come around to Casablanca, which is the major commercial city with, again, a large port. There's a new port construction here run by Maersk, the Danish company, and so the old port is being not so crowded. Will be right downtown, can walk off the ship. The town itself has over 1 million people now. It's tripled its population in the last 30 years because of the people leaving the upland villages to come in and find work. So it now has a vast interior of suburbanization. But the old Medina is still there, and the old souk is still there. This is the flag of Tangier, the city flag, which has a Phoenician on it, proudly, and a bit of grain. That whole area, upland, had been very rich agriculturally, but it's now continuing to dry out like all of North Africa. Looming over the whole town is the Mohammed V Al-Minar Mosque with its great minaret. And this again, we saw this architecture, we will see it in Malaga and Cadiz and Sevilla, this square tower, which is characteristic of the Moorish architecture. And the word Moorish in English and Spanish does refer to the Moroccans. And so when we come into the town, I believe there's a tour into the Medina, so you'll be led through the souk and all the little lanes and such. But this was the haunt of many international visitors. So one thing that Tangier is famous for is all of the hash dens, the intoxicated Europeans and a few Americans. Most famously, William Burroughs, the mad poet, lived there for a while, and then musicians and artists and such. It's been a place of refuge, but it's for many of its years, it was just considered an international city, not really Moroccan, though it is in Morocco. It had so many foreigners, like Casablanca. It was at a certain point, at the beginning of the 1900s, it was over half non-Moroccans living there. A lot in business, a lot of French. So French is the common language all through these major towns in Morocco. But it had the classic Moroccan house, which is whitewashed. And of course, this is where the name of Casablanca comes from, are these white lime-washed buildings, which are still the standard architecture just because of the heat. Again, that town of Tangier has spread from its old Medina out all over the hills and now has a lot of other business and places and even some curious drinks. What is that thing there? I think it says cuckoo cola, yes. A strange drink. But it's a beautiful town just because it's out on the sea and has a large bay and a busy nightlife, maybe too busy. Then Casablanca, where we're going, is the major industrial town, trading center, business center for all of Morocco. Again, Rabat is the political capital. Casablanca is where the banks and the various corporations are. It was a traditional port. When the Portuguese first came in the 1400s, the name of it was Anafa, which is the Berber name for the village that had walls and a mosque and a small port in it. Now it has grown to a city of over 3 million people. So again, it's filled up to the hills and up into the back country and is a great urban complex as much as there is in Morocco. Again, it has a Medina, the traditional souk and villages. The Habous district is the heart of the town, but it had been extended by French boulevards with many different kinds of architecture. But if you walk down some of the boulevards, you'd think you're in southern France. And of course, it is again a largely French-speaking town. Everybody learns it in school, for instance. And then, of course, it had its Hollywood moment when the film with Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman was made there, though the whole thing was done on a set in California, typically. But people go to Casablanca thinking, where's that cafe? Well, there is a Hard Rock cafe nowadays. Oh, well. And you can get a T-shirt with Humphrey Bogart on it, but he never made it there. And so you go to Casablanca, where we will be in a number of days, and you find that it is pretty much a modern city, other than the souk and the Medina, which is a very small part of it. This is one of the grand boulevards going down, and that tower is the Hassan II Mosque, which is the third largest in the world. It was built to commemorate his reign on his 60th birthday, and is the only mosque where you can go into the outer plaza, take your shoes off and walk around. It's actually built out over the ocean because they didn't want to destroy anything downtown to build it, but they built a big platform, and it can hold 25,000 people for prayers. So it's quite a sight in itself, and we'll be docked nearby. The downtown has, again, this sort of French-era buildings, tramways, busy traffic, and but you see it has also a kind of a blend of architecture. You have Arabic-style colonnades, and then with French Empire-style decorations. This is just a little view of the dock with the Hassan II Tower, or the minaret, I should call it, in the back. But you'll notice this town is just booming and building. So you have a modern Moroccan economy mixed with a traditional religion with a lot of foreign influence. And that's what makes Casablanca a very lively place, has a lot of nightlife. But that it's getting a skyline, but by law, none of the buildings can be higher than the minaret. This was the first tall building in Africa, built in 1949, opened 1950. And it's an example of how Morocco has felt like they have led, but not just the Islamic world, but all of Africa to modernize. But the problem is, of course, it's so far away. Africa, as we'll find it, is so vast that it's still, only the airplane has made it really accessible, other than ship. Here's the train station, but the train does not go anywhere else but in Morocco. So they have a desire to be as modern as everybody else thinks they are. So this happens to be the Morocco Mall, downtown Casablanca. I know you've all come to Africa to go to a mall. This one is particularly curious because you see on the right has the world's largest fish tank with 40 species, and then you can go in the center of it in a cylinder and then sort of be with the fish for a while. And the wealthy of Morocco usually live in Casablanca. That is the commercial center, and the elite are there, and then the political leadership, including the royal family, are up the road in Rabat. But this is the Corniche, the road along the the ocean, and so there's a lot of resorts, a lot of mansions, and suburban communities are quite prosperous in Casablanca. Completely different than what you find up in the mountains. I'll give you this little view of Rabat, which is up along a river north of Casablanca, and again it has an ancient center and a souk and palaces, and then broad boulevards where the government offices are. Now this was a fortified town, as many were, of course, in the olden days, because there was a lot of piracy along the coast here, and they call it this part of the Barbary coast, which fleets of corsairs would go out and attack any shipping coming along, and then there was attacks from the sea or by land, so that the center of Rabat has this tremendous big fortress, Bab al-Audia. It had been bombarded by the Portuguese, by the French came and took it, and then in earlier history, this is back to the Almovid time when the Arabs came over and conquered all of Morocco, and they were going to build the world's largest mosque back in about 1250, and they never completed it because of fighting and lack of capabilities. But the foundation stones are still there, with the one tower to the then King Hassan, the first one. And then his tomb is right nearby there. So if you go to Rabat, this is quite a beautiful place. Looks out over the ocean, and you see those beautiful arts. This is a distinctive Moroccan blend of architecture, which goes on even to the Catholic Church, Saint-Pierre in Rabat. So this is the only Catholic church I've ever seen with minarets and traditional Islamic friezes, but that's the kind of blend that Morocco is famous for, including this new minaret, the Telcom Tower. So Morocco is sort of striking with the architecture. I mean, it's sort of like Spain. You have fantastic antiquity, and then you have remarkable current architecture. This is at the airport near Casablanca, where they have put this Islamic frieze decoration on it. They don't even have a sign called the airport. I guess they know where they're going. And then if you go down the coast, you come to these other small cities that were trading posts for the Portuguese as they kind of hopped down the African coast. This is in Eshwara, and the remains of an old Portuguese fort that has been battered by the sea and falling down. There are a number that are still in good condition, and other forts on the north side of, this is near Tangier. So it's been for much of its history, there's always been somebody wanting to get in on Morocco or control it. Now it's peaceful, but here are the remains of the Portuguese fort, the sea gate at Eshwara. And the Portuguese, of course, are long gone, and we'll be visiting many other Portuguese forts as we go down to Angola and other parts of Africa. But this is one in El Jadida, which is south of Casablanca, which has this beautiful Gothic arches with a cistern well that fills up, that was the water supply for the fortress, which otherwise was just on the sea. And the sea down there is famous for its good surf. So if any of you are surfers, this is one of the places where The Endless Summer was filmed, because you have the Atlantic storms producing this kind of surf all the time. And so it's still, a lot of people come down for, let's say, recreational purposes, and then they go to the cultural interest. Most dramatic of which I say is Marrakesh, if you haven't been there, and that's sort of a cliche in, let's say, hippie culture. You hitchhiked all the way to Marrakesh, and then you hope you got out with your mind intact, because it was a kind of campground for many a musician, especially, and now has a lot of people just go there to see the ancient palaces. Now, this was a kingdom unto itself that then was part of the federation under the emperor, as they call it. Now it's just the king of Morocco. But this is one of the last cities that has a full city wall around it, with the Medina, the souk, and different palaces in the city itself. And it's on a vast plain, and it's part of the trade routes between the north, the south, and particularly the camel trains that came over the mountains to trade in Marrakesh. So this is the minaret tower of Jadid Nafa, one of the palaces of the Sultan of Marrakesh. Now there still is. I mean, the royalty is still alive and well in all of these towns, but they've often taken their palaces and turned them into hotels because of the interesting architecture. And again, like the other places I showed you, they have a lot of fountains and beautiful uh, structures. And then outside where the people are, there are, in Marrakesh in particular, it has this fantastic big souk. If you've been there, it's full of vendors of all kinds of things, and from rugs to camels to spices and foods, and it's a very dramatic place to go, particularly because it has a lot of musicians. And Marrakesh is famous for its animated day life, night life, and then sort of a constant badgering to buy things. And again, the people in the souk can speak whatever language you have, especially if it's in the coin. So you can sit and watch in a lot of parts of Marrakesh. There are traditional crafts. Here's a guy stringing flowers, dye works, making fabrics and jewelry. There's a very elaborate traditions in Morocco of robes and jewels and things. And in Marrakesh in particular, is famous for the Ganawa performers. Now these were originally mercenary soldiers that came from southern Morocco. They're often more black, but they had a kind of a dance and music that was training. So they would do acrobatics while they had a drum and cymbals and singing, and then they have this characteristic tassel on their hats that then spin around in rhythm. And this is the only thing I can think of that's like is in Brazil, the capoeira, the kind of fighting dance that was developed to keep a kind of physical strength and acrobatic ability. And so these guys are on the street busking, or I've seen some in theaters, the very, very good ones. I have a friend who's actually from New York, but he's Moroccan, and he goes back, he's a Ghanaian performer, and he goes back every year to visit his family and do concerts indoors, but you'll see them on the streets. And I have a little music of it, maybe we'll play it on the way out. So Marrakesh is much more exotic and much more lively than perhaps any place in Morocco, because it concentrates these different peoples and traditions right there in the city with beautiful grounds. This is outside of Marrakesh, the Koutaiba Palace with this beautiful pavilion over it, the Manara Pavilion on a man-made lake. And you can see in the back the Atlas Mountains, which are often snow-capped. And so you have quite a beautiful interior land in Morocco if you've seen it. I mean, some people actually go up there skiing on the season. The other city you might have visited or should go see is the one Fez, which is again in the Central Valley, south of Tangiers, but east of Casablanca. And this is an ancient city, goes back thousands of years, but when the Arabs came and brought Islam, it built some very large mosques, and as a center for Islamic studies and also of course, a market town. And surrounded by fortresses up on the hills. So this is one of them, the Bab el-Kernis, a tremendous big fortress that guarded it from either the neighbors or the foreigners. And again, you have this elaboration of Islamic style arches with friezes and beautiful stone and bronze work. Now these are not active military installations, but you can go in and see the former extent of the defenses of the city of Fez. This is one of the former sultans, Moulay Ismail, in Fez, and his tomb. Again, a sight to be seen on the interior, but it's surrounded by a big wall. Then in the Medina, you have all of these craft works, including a tannery, which is, of course, a very fragrant place to go visit. And then the souk. And then right cheek and jowl with all of these would be madrasas and mosques. So this is because it's deep in a valley, you have it all sort of concentrated right in the center of the town. And one of the madrasas dates from the 1300s. One of the features of Fez, though, it has an annual musical festival of sacred music. And as an example of how Morocco is a cultured nation, they invite religious musicians and choirs from all over the world. And so in Fez, every March, they have concerts in all these beautiful palaces and mosques, not in the mosque, I should say, but outside of the mosque, so that this is one of the typical performers in Fez itself of the local music, which is on the oud. And this, of course, is originally the Persian instrument that spread across North Africa and is very elaborate music on about 10 strings. The simplified version that was in Spain became what we know as the guitar, which of course has its following. But then if you go up into the mountains of Morocco, then you have many little villages tucked away into the high hills and far away, and that's where you sort of go back in time, and you have a culture which is far more conservative and completely away from the industrial commercial center at Casablanca or where all the foreigners are. But because Morocco is a fairly hospitable country, people go up there hiking and go staying in villages. When I was last there, they were having this great hot air balloon festival, or I remember Richard Branson had brought his big balloon and was trying to cross over the Atlas Mountains, and he didn't have enough air. I guess that's why he went into airplanes instead of balloons. But the air up there and the climate is so hospitable. Even though the altitude it gets cold and there's snow, it's often clear weather. Morocco is proudly one of the more weather-friendly countries. And so if you go up high enough, you can go do this sort of thing, skiing off of a parasail. And they actively promote all of this so that Morocco becomes a friendly destination. Even up in these far villages, they're happy to see you. As you go down over into the eastern slope of the Atlas Mountains, you get these Saharan towns that are all mud pack and quite elaborate, very ancient. They go 1,000 years, some of these buildings. And have you ever been on a cruise to Timbuktu? Well, that's sort of what this area is like. You go through the sea of sand, and then you come to this very elaborate, almost vertical towns that are essentially they're built together so that they're a fortified town. But also, the more buildings you get together like that, the cooler they are in the interior. So they're a relief from the scorching heat. So this is a different side of Morocco where you start having the Tuareg people, other Berber that are still nomadic, that have not moved to the cities, and again the camel culture. So I'm sure you've all ridden a camel and stayed in a tent before, but this becomes adventure travel over this side of Morocco. And I was in my readings about Morocco. There was a quote from the ancient historian Pliny the Elder, who described this part of the world as lush savannas with elephants and forests and prosperous towns. And over the millennia, North Africa has dried out, and all of those former semi-tropical areas have become sand dunes. And so this is part of the, let's say, climate change of our long past now, that the people that live in Morocco have actually been driven out of the Sahara, as they are still being driven out of the Sahel to go down into more southern and habitable parts of the equatorial band of Africa. So that, again, you can see time and history on display in a place like Morocco. But you can imagine what it was like, let's say, we don't exactly know how long ago, but 4,000 years ago, it was a completely different place. And so what are the towns of the northwest and the cities now of Morocco became places where people had to move just because of the desertification of North Africa. And the same thing, of course, happened all the way around the Middle East, so that this is where some of the characteristics of these peoples comes from being essentially climate refugees. And some have said that even to the difficulty of life and the remembrance that things were easier once, but that's a subject for one of our forums to talk about. So I'll just leave you with the last camel ride, and I hope you would get to go off into one of either the tours or come back to Morocco and see, because it's really quite a fascinating land, but it's above all very hospitable and tolerant of our visit. And with that, I'll just say I'll see you there after we've had our fun in Spain. And thank you very much for coming today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as we have the time. Thank you very much.